In this demonstration, I'm going to go over with you slicing, creating a slice for a header graphic, such as a logo, and creating slices for each of the navigation items. When you're slicing navigation items, it's important to have your layers very well organized. For example, in this case, I have an up state, which is the normal or null state of the navigation buttons. I also have an overstate. The overstate consists of a background change in which a little tab appears, and that just gives the user feedback when they roll over the button. It lets them know that they have interacted with something that is a button. It's very subtle navigation in this case. The buttons aren't large, they're not loud, they don't say, "Here, click me." They just are part of the top navigation, very subtle, because the important part of this site was to drive people to understand about what this organization does. This is a nonprofit organization, and to drive people to donate to the nonprofit. So let's get started with the slices. It helps me a lot to begin by drawing my guides first. I want to draw the guides in the same size as the overstate. And the reason for this is because the overstate is the larger button state. In some cases, your upstate and your overstate have different combinations of elements. So you choose the state that has the largest combination of elements, and in this case it's the overstate. So I'm going to drag a guide to the bottom of the button area, and I'm going to drag guides to the edge of each of the button zones. What I'm doing, my ultimate goal, is to create graphics that the programmer can then float above a white background using CSS. Another thing that I'm noticing is that I have snapping turned on. When I'm dragging the guides, I'm going to turn snap off. This will make it so that my guides don't snap to any other elements, any grid lines, anything that could cause the guides to be misplaced in any way. I need them to be exactly placed at the edges of the buttons. And I'll drag them into place, little by little, slowly but surely. Until I have all edges of the buttons covered. And the reason that I don't need to drag a guide to the top edge is because we already have, that's the end. That's where the site begins. So there's really no need to drag a guide to the top section. And I can zoom in to even look more closely at the accuracy of the guides. So it always helps to zoom in, even if you think you have your guides pretty well in hand. You really want to get the edges of the items because you don't want a lot of miscellaneous anti-aliased pixels if you don't need them. So it's good to be able to zoom in and drag the guides more accurately into place. When I'm happy with the guides for the nav buttons, I also want to drag some guides around the logo element, because this is also a header graphic that we need to provide. More than likely, the address will be provided through CSS and code, so I probably do not need to slice this as a graphic. But I do need to provide them with a logo slice, and I do need to provide them with each of the button states. I'm going to zoom back out. And now I can begin to create my slices. Using the slice tool, it's hiding under the crop tool. I'm going to choose the Slice tool, not the Slice Select tool. The Slice Select tool we'll use later when we select our slices to add optimization settings. So I choose the Slice tool, and I turn snapping on. Snap to Guides is selected, so we'll turn snapping on. And that's going to cause my Slice tool to snap to the guides, which makes it really easy for me to click and drag. Look what happens when I drag and create the first slice. It gives me a little blue rectangle of information. It lets me know what type of slice this is and that it's a user-built slice as opposed to a Photoshop generated slice that is gray rectangle. And then I need to create rectangles for each of the buttons. And so I click and drag using my guides to snap to. And it really helps to have those guides drawn because I don't know if I would be steady enough with the mouse to get an accurate slice. The other thing is it constrains the slices to the exact same height, which is also very important when we deliver assets to the programmers. Once I have created my slices, now it's time to add optimization settings for the slices. If I go into File, Save for Web and Devices, you can see that each slice using the Slice Select tool can be selected individually. If I click on each one, notice how that changes which one is selected. I can also use this hand tool to move other slices into view. So that's a very, very helpful device. So for each of these slices, I'm going to select an optimization setting. For the logo, because it's one solid color, I'm going to choose GIF optimization, but because the background is white and we don't have any gradients going on in the background that I need to worry about, or any sort of pictures or other elements, I'm going to uncheck transparency. The reason I'm using GIF optimization is because this is text and line art. GIF optimization is best for text and line art, whereas JPEG optimization would be best for images. I'm going to use the same optimization settings for the buttons. And we're going to start by exporting the overstate of the buttons. And I need to set for each one of these. I'm going to uncheck transparency because we're going to go ahead and use the blue and the white background. I probably don't need 256 colors. I could probably get by with 64 colors. That didn't change the size of my exported graphic. Notice that the size of the exported graphic appears at the bottom or below. And so this is expected to be at 661 bytes, which is very small. It's less than a kilobyte. You can choose different download options. And it depends on your audience. If you think that your audience is mostly connected via modem, which doesn't happen very much anymore, then that's the setting you would select. If you think most of the people who are looking at your site are at least able to download at around 256 kilobits via cable or DSL line, that would probably be a good baseline to set. And it'll let you know that this graphic will load in less than 1 second at 256 kilobits per second. But it's nice to know that you can choose different download times to set kind of a baseline for what the possible slowest connection might be for your audience. And I continue setting my optimization settings. Unchecking transparency, probably 64 colors is plenty. Some people ask me whether to use no dither, diffusion, pattern, or noise. The default is diffusion. In this case, I don't know that we're going to need much diffusion or any sort of special anti-aliasing method. I could probably get by with no dither, and we could ensure that we have very crisp graphics. The different types of algorithms or color reduction algorithms are listed here. Restrictive restricts it to only very common colors across a wide range of monitor settings. But you probably don't need to use that very much anymore. Most monitors are capable of viewing millions of colors. So probably perceptual, a perceived color algorithm would be a good setting for these buttons. So I'm going to choose perceptual for this one as well, and no dither. And I want the same export settings for each of my graphics. I also keep convert to sRGB checked. I have found that when that option is checked, it maintains most of the kind of robust color. It makes it so that it doesn't lose too much of its brightness in color. Sometimes, if you don't have sRGB checked, you can lose saturation, and we do not want to lose saturation of these colors. You might ask, why are we choosing 64 colors as opposed to 2 colors, white and blue? It's because there is just a little bit of anti-aliasing on the edges of the letter forms as well as the edges of the buttons. So we want to allow for some anti-aliasing to occur, but not too much. And notice how the graphic got even more crisp when we unchecked transparency. And that's really what we're looking for, is a crisp graphic. And once we feel pretty confident that we are done setting our preferences for each of our slices that we're going to export, we can now name the slices. If I hit Done, which is on the bottom right of my Save for Web, you may not be able to see it because it might be just out of the area that you can view. I'm going to click on Done, and that's very important, as opposed to Cancel. If I click on Cancel, it will not save or maintain any of the settings that I have just selected. If I hit Save, it's going to go ahead and spit out all the graphics, but we haven't named them yet, so I don't want to do that. But if I click on Done, it's going to save, and Photoshop will remember all of the settings that we just made. For each of these slices, if I use the Slice Select tool, I can double-click on each one and change the slice options. In this case, we want to name the slice. So we're going to call this one Logo. Now we're not going to create a link because in this case we're not using Photoshop to create code for us. So we aren't going to need a target either. That would let the browser know whether to open in the same window or a different window. We're not going to add message text. We're not creating a rollover message. And we don't need an alt tag. These are all code related items, and because we're not going to use Photoshop to create our code, we don't need to worry about those slice options at this time. Under Slice Background Type, we could choose white because it actually does have a white background, but it's not necessary because we already have a background established. But we'll hit OK. Double click on this slice. We'll call Home. That's our Home button. Hit OK. Double click on this one. We'll call Who. Hit OK. This one we'll call What. This one I will call How. Notice how I'm using all lowercase. It's important to be consistent, and using all lowercase letter forms just makes it a lot easier across the board in naming, to follow a good naming convention. Now we're ready to export the slices. Okay, to export the slices, I'm going under File, Save for Web and Devices, And now you can see that it's maintained my settings that I had placed previously. If I click on each one of the graphics, it's maintaining the settings that we've already set, so we don't need to do that again. Now I'm going to hit Save, which is at the bottom of this Save for Web dialog box. When I hit Save, it brings up another dialog box called Save Optimize As. Now, because we're going to try to export a bunch of slices at once, I'm going to hit Cancel. Because what you need to do is select all of the slices that I want to export. We've already named them. So using Slice Select tool and holding my Shift key down on the keyboard, I select the logo, I select the home button. I can use the hand to move things around. I'm still holding the Shift key down, Shift selecting all of the slices. So by holding the Shift key down and using the Slice Select tool, I can select all of my slices. Now if I hit Save at the bottom and bring up Save Optimized As, we don't need to worry about this name here because you've already named your slices in the Slice Options panel. It's actually going to create an images folder for me. So for this demonstration and for discussion, I'm going to have it save on the desktop so you can see what happens as well. The format we're going to choose is images only. We're not going to have Photoshop export any code in this case. The settings, we will for now use the default settings. The default settings are actually going to export the images into a folder called Images. You can see that's already checked. That's what it's going to do. You can change some of these default settings, but for now, for just your first export, keep it to default settings. And we're going to export selected slices as opposed to all of the slices. We want selected slices only. When I hit Save and I return to my desktop, I can see that a folder of images has been made. And within this folder, you can see that each one of the buttons has been made, as well as the logo. One thing that you'll notice is that we exported the overstate of the buttons. What we haven't exported is the upstate of the buttons. To do that, we have to go back into my main file. I have to turn off the overstates and turn on the upstate. Then I need to rename each of the slices. So this one is going to be prevention _up. This one will be how _up. And this is just to differentiate so that I don't overwrite the slices I've already made. And I'm just adding an _up to each one of these as I'm going to export the upstate for each of these buttons. Once I have named each of the slices or renamed each of the slices, I can go return to File, Save for Web and Devices. This time I'm only going to select, I'm going to unselect the logo and only select the buttons. I can tell that they're selected because I get a yellow outline around the graphics or the slices that are selected. Again, holding my Shift key down on the keyboard, I Shift select each one of the slices that I want to export. Once they're selected with the yellow outline showing, I hit Save, and that's at the bottom of the Save for Web and Devices dialog box. Save Optimize As. We're going to click Desktop. Don't worry about changing the name because we've already named the slices, as you recall, images only, settings set to default slices, and selected slices only, as opposed to all slices. Hit save, return to my desktop. I look in my images folder, and now you can see the upstate of each one of the buttons has been exported. So it's a really handy tool to create graphics quickly and easily that you can share with and utilize for programming and creating your own websites. So let's review quickly what we did, each of the steps. I return to Photoshop. If my computer would allow me to return to Photoshop, there we go. I've got organized layers. I have upstates and overstates for each of the buttons. The first thing I did was drag guides. Guidelines are dragged from the rulers. If you don't have your rulers showing, you can go under View and make sure Rulers is checked. So I drag the guidelines from the rulers. Then I use my Slice tool to create each of the slices. Then I went into File, Save for Web, and selected each slice individually and changed their export settings. Once I had changed each one of the slices I wanted to export, and I have selected their optimization settings, I hit Done for Photoshop to save those settings. Then I used my Slice Select tool to name each one of the slices by double-clicking, typing the name, and hitting OK. Remember that we didn't fill out these fields because they're related to code, and we are not using Photoshop to export code in this case. It's a good thing to look at your dimensions and just make sure that the height of each of these graphics, if you are doing a horizontal nav, is consistent. If you've used guidelines, it should be consistent across all. After I named each of the buttons, I made sure that I had the correct state turned on related to the name that I gave the button. And then I went to File, Save for Web and Devices. I used the Slice Select tool, and I held down my Shift key to select a series of buttons. I can tell they're selected by seeing the little yellow, the blue outline changes to a yellow outline, and that's how I know that they're selected. And then I hit Save. Under Save Optimize, I didn't change anything in the top field because we've already named the slices in the Slice Tool Options box. For the format, we chose Images Only. We kept the settings to default settings, which put the images in an image folder, and we exported selected slices only. And this concludes the demonstration on exporting navigation and logo slices.